am Frances Callier.
And I'm Angela V. Shelton.
And we're Frangela.
You know what you need in your life? The Final Word Podcast.
Yes, you do.
That's right. It is the final word on all things political and pop cultural.
Where we make real news real funny.
Where we inspire you so you can #resist.
Subscribe and get a new episode of the Final Word Podcast each week. It's the news we think you need to hear.
That's right. We think you need to hear it. Okay?
Yeah, it's what we say so.
That's right. And because all we do is give, every Thursday you can listen to our hysterical podcast, Idiot of the Week.
We round up the stupid because you know what? Somebody has to.
Okay. All we do is give.
Our press secretary gave alternative facts to that.
My goal in this deposition was to be truthful, but not particularly helpful.
Welcome to Unspun, the podcast that makes you better at finding the truth. The way people get news is changing. It used to be that there were many reporters who would research stories and write articles, but now politicians and famous people share information directly with you on social media and the internet. That means you find out things fast, but it's up to you to make sure the information's actually accurate. And newsmakers don't always do their part. The temptation to manipulate information is strong. They bend the truth to deceive so that they can avoid accountability, so that they can advance their agendas. When you recognize these agendas, you can sometimes find out what's real. And we're at a crossroads where anyone can share anything online, so it's important to sharpen your critical thinking skills. Finding that deception before it goes viral is pretty much a survival skill now, and we're going to do it together. Let's get unspun. Welcome to this week's Unspun. In this episode, we'll explore the origins of a logical thinking problem that makes people hasty to judge and easy to manipulate, how it's evolved over time, and why it's so important as we seek to reconnect in the post-COVID world. We'll also look at some practical strategies to recognize and overcome this bias in our own lives. But before we get started, I'd like to ask that if you are a regular listener and you like what you hear, please consider leaving a rating and review on whatever podcast platform you're using right now. This is because your thoughts help to make Unspun discoverable for everyone else, and they also just mean so much to me personally. Okay, ready? Let's get unspun. Have you ever wondered why we're so quick to judge others based on their actions, but we'll cut ourselves some slack? Or why it's so easy to misunderstand why someone does something? The fundamental attribution error might just be the key to understanding. Now, at its core, the fundamental attribution error, or FAE for short, is our tendency to believe that other people's behavior is because of their personality or character, but explaining our own behaviors based on the circumstances. So, for example, imagine that you're driving and someone cuts you off in traffic. What's your first thought? It might be, what a reckless idiot. And that's the FAE in action. You're attributing their behavior to an internal characteristic, being reckless. You assume it's a trait that they have. But did you consider that maybe that person was rushing a loved one to the hospital? Or maybe they just didn't see you. That's an external factor, so you're thinking about the context or the situation. And it's easy to overlook these kind of factors when you're thinking about why other people do things. Here's the other side. Maybe I'm driving and I'm the one who cuts someone off. I'm probably going to blame the circumstances. I couldn't judge how fast they were going, or the sun was in my eyes. I'm going to give myself the benefit of the doubt, thinking about what aspects of the context make me do what I do. Now, this particular bias was first identified by social psychologists in the 1940s, and today it's one of the most well-known concepts in social psychology. But to truly understand its significance, we kind of need to look at how it developed over time. So, the story of the fundamental attribution error begins with the broader field of attribution theory, which considers how people determine what causes behaviors in events, why people do what they do and why things happen. Basically, it's about how we make sense of the world around us. And we start all the way back in the 1940s with Fritz Heider, who was an Austrian psychologist. Heider was fascinated by trying to explain how people interpret and explain the world around them, and he proposed that people act as naive psychologists, so they're constantly trying to understand the causes of the events and the behaviors that they see. And Heider actually introduced two key concepts. The first was internal attribution. So this is explaining someone's behavior based on their personal characteristics, based on their traits, or based on their abilities. The second was external attribution, and this is explaining behavior based on the context. So this is the specifics of the time or the environment. Heider didn't actually do work to prove his ideas, but his theories and definitions have laid the groundwork for future research in attribution theory and eventually did lead to the discovery of the fundamental attribution error. Social psychologist Harold Kelly built the covariation model in the 1960s. Covariation is a fancy word for meaning that things change at the same time. And Kelly proposed 3 factors that people use when they're trying to decide why others are doing what they're doing. Number 1 is consensus, which you could define as how other people behave in the same situation. Number 2 is distinctiveness, or how that person behaves in different situations. And number 3 is consistency, which is how frequently that behavior is going to occur when that same kind of situational factor happens. That's a little confusing, so let's think about an example. Let's say you're trying to determine why your friend Alex is laughing at a particular comedian's jokes. You could look at consensus. Do other people laugh at the comedian's jokes? If everyone else laughs too, there's high consensus. The second is distinctiveness. Does Alex laugh at other comedians' jokes? If Alex only laughs at this particular comedian, then that behavior is distinctive. And the third is consistency. Does Alex always laugh at this comedian's jokes? If Alex laughs every time, then the behavior is consistent. Now, if Alex consistently laughs at this comedian's jokes, doesn't laugh at other comedians, and everyone else also finds this comedian funny, you might conclude then that the comedian is actually funny. That's an external attribution. However, if Alex laughs at all comedians, regardless of who they are, you might just conclude that Alex is easily amused. That's an internal attribution. It's Alex, it's not the comedian. So Kelly's work added more nuance to our understanding of how people make these attributions, showing that we don't always just decide it's either a characteristic or the context. The phenomenon of the fundamental attribution error was first demonstrated in a classic study by Edward Jones and Victor Harris all the way back in the 1960s. And in their experiment, participants read essays either supporting or opposing Fidel Castro's Cuba. And they were told that the essay writers were assigned their positions randomly, okay? So they were told what to write about. And despite knowing this, the participants still tended to believe that their writers' actual attitudes matched the positions that they wrote about. So this study showed that even when people are aware of important and real situational factors, like that the writers were assigned the perspective to write about, they still tended to assume it was a disposition, right? A characteristic of the person and not the setting. This was a groundbreaking demonstration of what would later come to be known as the fundamental attribution error. And as with any scientific theory, the concept of fundamental attribution has been refined and challenged and expanded over the years. You know, are we really just making these knee-jerk decisions, or can we kind of explain it better? So, a really important social psychologist named Daniel Gilbert proposed this compelling model to explain how we attribute behavior. And according to Gilbert, attribution isn't just a single thing that we do. We don't just make that snap judgment, drive or jerk, but rather it's a 2-step process. He said the first step was characterization. And so this step is really fast, it doesn't require any effort, and oftentimes it's unconscious. So people will automatically make an initial attribution after observing someone's behavior. It's kind of like your brain's default setting, jumping to conclusions about the kind of person that someone is. The second step, though, is making an effort for the situation, or what he called correction. And this step is slower, and it's more deliberate, and it requires effort and motivation to think about. And so if we have the time, the energy, the reason to think more deeply, we might change those initial thoughts, those initial snap judgments, by considering those situational factors that might have influenced the behavior. Gilbert's model kind of helps to explain why the fundamental attribution error is so common. Basically, we often kind of rely on our automatic attributions because they're quick and easy. You know, in that situational correction, it takes more effort. And this is especially true when your brain is busy, when you're distracted, or when you just don't want to think deeply about a situation. So think for a minute about you reading a feed on social media. This might be a time when you're busy or distracted, right? So when you see that viral video about what looks like an entitled woman asking for the manager or whatever, it might be easier to just accept the way that the post frames it. You know, oh, they're such a Karen, you might say. And so I see this sometimes when social media posters are pulling highlights from live events like campaign rallies. It's easier for me to think, wow, that was a bad take, or gee, that lady's ignorant, than it is to think about the larger context that I might be missing because I'm actually just seeing a clip. I'm not seeing the whole thing. Another social psychologist named Bertram Mall changed the traditional view of the fundamental attribution error, and he challenged it as an oversimplification of how people explain behavior. And he argued actually that people use a much richer and more nuanced set of explanations than simply, assigning behavior to internal disposition or external situation. And he proposed that people use a whole bunch of folk explanations to make sense of behavior, which go beyond that, simple binary choice of internal or external. And so these explanations can include reasons, which might be beliefs or desires or values or goals that motivate an action. So, for example, someone might do or say something because they care about kids or because they want to control women, that kind of thing. And these explanations can also include intentions, which are the specific things that a person wants to achieve through their actions. So that might be something like, if someone's kind of trolly, they might want to get readers upset by their spicy take. It could be enabling factors. So these are situation factors that make it, possible or easier for someone to act in a particular way. So for example, if they get a lot of likes for what they do. So Mall emphasized that people are really interested in intentions. We want to know if an action was intentional and if it was accidental. And if it was intentional, what the person wanted to achieve. And this focus on the reason why helps shape moral judgments that we make. Did the person accidentally run the red light, in which case they're a careless but good person? Or did they do it on purpose, in which case they're an entitled jerk who thinks he's more important than everyone else? One of the most fascinating developments in attribution theory has been the exploration of how culture shapes the way that we attribute people's actions. And what the research showed is that although the fundamental attribution error is common in some cultures, it's actually not found everywhere. So Joan Miller and Richard Nisbet conducted some groundbreaking research on how cultural backgrounds, particularly individualistic versus collectivist cultures, shape the way we explain behavior. So they found that people from individualistic cultures like the United States and many European countries where they value individual rights and freedoms, they tend to focus more on individual actors and their dispositions when explaining behaviors. In contrast, people from collectivist cultures where they value working together more than they do individual rights, they tend to pay more attention to the broader social context, to relationships, and generally parts of the situation. So, for example, in one study, Miller compared the explanations given by American and Indian, like from the Indian subcontinent, participants for a variety of behaviors. And Americans were more likely to make what they call dispositional attributions. He's the kind of person who does that. While Indian people were more likely to make situational attributions. Well, something going on must have forced him to do that. Okay, so that's all very interesting. But what do we take away from these studies? First, I think we can recognize that what seems like a natural or logical way to explain behavior is not actually universal, but it's kind of changed by our cultural upbringing. And I think sometimes people in the media do a bad job of understanding this. So for example, after the 2016 election, there were a whole bunch of, I spent an afternoon in a coffee shop in a Midwestern state, and now I understand rural people kinds of stories in major news outlets were later criticized by people in those same rural areas as being sort of naive or, inadequate in explaining things. Vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance's book, Hillbilly Elegy, which tried to explain the situation in Appalachia based on primarily those internal factors, the characteristics of people, was also criticized for this, for ignoring the factors of the larger context. If we understand these cross-cultural differences, that can actually help us to communicate better. If we know that people from different cultures may have different ways of explaining the same event, this can help us to have more empathy or maybe become more tolerant. And on the flip side, when you encourage people to think in terms of moral absolutes, right? It is this kind of person that is a good person, a bad person. It becomes easier to attribute people's ideas and their actions to those personal factors, and you can even use this to devalue people. You see this sometimes in the way politicians will frame people who show up at a border in the US or Europe as a refugee. Why are they here? Is it because they're bad people who want to steal jobs from another country? That would be an intrinsic factor. Or is it because of the conditions in their home country, which would be a situational factor?
The issues of the day are really complicated. Everybody loves a good hot take, but really understanding an issue takes some digging. I'm Asha Rangappa. I teach national security law at Yale University. I'm a former FBI special agent, and I'm a legal and national security analyst.
And I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down to a soundbite or a tweet.
Join us each week as we dig deep into pressing legal topics. Listen to It's Complicated anywhere you get your podcasts, and check out our YouTube channel.
The issues of the day are really complicated. Everybody loves a good hot take, but really understanding an issue takes some digging. I'm Asha Rangappa. I teach national security law at Yale University. I'm a former FBI special agent, and I'm a legal and national security analyst.
And I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down to a soundbite or a tweet.
Join us each week as we dig deep into pressing legal topics. Listen to It's Complicated anywhere you get your podcasts, and check out our YouTube channel.
I need to take a quick break. Welcome back. All right, so now that we've explored the theory behind the fundamental attribution error, let's look at some real-life examples to see how it plays out. Imagine an interviewer who's meeting a candidate who seems kind of nervous, and they stumble over their words and they don't make eye contact, and the interviewer assumes that the candidate is incompetent or lacks confidence. In that case, the interviewer is attributing the candidate's behavior to their personality traits rather than considering situational factors like, maybe interview anxiety or not having slept well the night before or something like that. And if we're still at work, we might consider a team member who always misses deadlines and produces kind of bad work. And the manager might assume that they're lazy or they're unmotivated or that they're lacking in skill. And so that's that fundamental attribution error in action. The manager's attributing the employee's poor performance to their sort of intrinsic things without exploring maybe situational factors, like maybe they just have too much work to do well, or they haven't had the right training, or maybe they're having personal issues outside of work. Or how about this? You're walking down the street and you see someone who's dressed in ripped clothing and they have a bunch of tattoos and piercings. And you might make assumptions about their character or their intelligence or their social status. You're attributing their appearance to their personality or their lifestyle choices without considering maybe cultural influences or personal preferences, or even just that appearances can be deceiving. Here's one that I think we all see. Someone posts a controversial opinion on social media, and commenters immediately attack their character, calling them names and making assumptions about their intelligence or their morals. The commenters are attributing that opinion solely to their flawed personality or beliefs, not maybe considering that there might be different values, different experiences, or, just different perspectives that kind of shaped their view. And it's particularly pronounced in political discussions. Let's look at a couple of examples. Maybe person A sees a news report about people protesting against a government policy that they support, and they say, oh, these protesters, they're just a bunch of ignorant, misinformed troublemakers. This is a clear example of that fundamental attribution error because the person is attributing the protesters' actions just to their perceived character flaws, right, like ignorance or troublemaking, without considering the possibility that they might have legitimate concerns. Or person B maybe is in a heated online debate about a social issue, and they find their opponent's arguments maybe illogical or offensive, and they just conclude, well, this person is just closed-minded and heartless. In this case, person B is attributing their opponent's views just to negative personality traits like closed-mindedness or heartlessness, without considering maybe different life experiences that might shape the perspective. And then there's Aunt Gladys, that family member whose political views are really different from you. And maybe you're having dinner with Gladys and you're shocked when she says something that you find really insensitive or offensive. And you think, my aunt is a bad person with hateful beliefs. So in that case, you're attributing Gladys's comments solely to her character and beliefs. But it might be possible that she's just repeating misinformation that she heard in that Facebook group she's a member of that drives you crazy, or just expressing views she's heard from her own friends. Okay, now that we understand what the fundamental attribution error is and how it shows up in a couple of situations, let's look at some strategies for recognizing and overcoming it. First of all, when you find someone who's behaving in a way that you find frustrating or confusing, you can resist the urge to judge and instead ask yourself, why might they be saying this, or why might they be acting this way? You can think about the present situation. You can think about their past experiences. You might think about the context that they're coming from that might be influencing their behavior. And if you can talk to them, you can ask some clarifying questions to ensure that you really understand what it is that they're saying. So pay attention to what other people say, both verbally and maybe even their nonverbal things like their gestures. And you can understand their point of view even if you don't agree with it. And then you can maybe put yourself in the other person's shoes. Think about what's going through their mind, what challenges they might be having that you don't know. And realize that people's backgrounds and their cultures and their experiences will shape their perspectives and their behaviors. Do know your own limits. First impressions can be misleading. Our brains tend to make snap judgments based on limited information. So, you can consider if there's another way to interpret a situation you're looking at. And remember Daniel Gilbert's two-step model of attribution. When you find yourself making a quick judgment about someone's behavior, take a pause. Ask yourself, have I considered the situation? Maybe make sure you have the time and the mental space to go to that second step of thought. And definitely remember that if you're multitasking, if you're distracted, if you're using a continuous feed scroll like you might on social media, your judgment might not be the best. So when you find yourself judging other people harshly, ask yourself, how would I explain my own behavior in a similar situation? And finally, you can learn more about how different people think about what is normal behavior. One way that I like to do this is to have some people on social media that I follow who I know have different perspectives than I do. This can be famous people, politicians from a party that you disagree with, those kind of things. And I actually do this. I curate lists of different people like that. And I have to admit, I do have some friends from college and my earlier life of very different perspectives from mine on some issues. And I still have connections to them on social media. And although I really do find some of their opinions pretty off-putting, I don't generally mute them, unless I'm upset enough to respond in an unkind way, and then I will mute them, but usually just for 30 days. So, it's fine to block obvious trolls, but for people that I actually know, hearing their opinions and thinking about why they might believe that day has actually taught me a lot. So to kind of sum up, the fundamental attribution error, it's a powerful cognitive bias, and it shapes how we look at, understand, and interact with people in our world, and how we interpret the actions of strangers when they're described to us in the news and especially on social media. If you're listening to me today from a more individualistic country, you might be more likely to make this kind of thinking error, but paying attention to what you're thinking can help you fight it. And if you're listening from a more collaborative one, I hope this episode helps you understand more about why some people in those individualistic countries do kind of form opinions the way they do. Misunderstandings can have really important and far-reaching consequences, but if you know your biases, it can help you to be a part of the solution for good information. Thanks for joining me this week. Thanks for getting Unspun with me this week. Unspun is a production of me, Amanda Sturgill, and is a proud member of the MSW Media family of podcasts. Send me your thoughts and ideas about trickery in the news on Gmail at TheUnspunPodcast@gmail.com. I even write back. And find this episode's show notes and more information at TheUnspunPodcast.substack.com. Want to learn more and get smarter? Check out my book, Detecting Deception, Tools to Fight Fake News, which is available on Amazon or your favorite online bookseller. And until next time, stay sharp, everyone.
Hi, I'm Dan Dunn, host of What We're Drinking with Dan Dunn, the most wildly entertaining adult beverage-themed podcast in the history of the medium. That's right, the boozy best of the best, baby. And we have the cool celebrity promos to prove it. Check this out.
Hi, I'm Allison Janney, and you're here with me on What We're Drinking with Dan Dunn. And that's my sexy voice. Boom.
Boom is right, Academy Award winner Allison Janney. As you can see, celebrities just love this show. How cool is that?
Hey, this is Scottie Pippen, and you're listening to The Dan Dunn Show. And wait, hold on. The name of the show is what?
All right, sure. Scottie Pippen momentarily forgot the show's name, but there's a first time for everything.
Hey everyone, this is Scoot McNairy. I'm here with Dan Dunn on What Are You Drinking? What's it called again?
Fine, twice. But famous people really do love this show.
Hi, this is Will Forte, and you're, for some reason, listening to What We're Drinking with Dan Dunn.
Now, what do you mean, for some reason, Will Forte? What's going on?
Hi, this is Kurt Russell. Listen, I escaped from New York, but I couldn't get the hell out of Dan Dunn's happy hour. Please, send help.
Send help? Oh, come on, Kurt Russell. Can somebody out there please help me?
I'm Dita Von Teese, and you're listening to What We're Drinking with Dan Dunn. Let me try one more time. Come on. Is that right?
Sorry.
What we're drinking?
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Right,
it's just...
Is it right?
Ah, that's better. So be like Dita Von Teese, friends, and listen to What We're Drinking with Dan Dunn, available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, I'm Frances Callier.
And I'm Angela V. Shelton.
And we're Frangela.
You know what you need in your life? The Final Word Podcast.
Yes, you do.
That's right. It is the final word on all things political and pop cultural.
Where we make real news real funny.
Where we inspire you so you can #resist.
Subscribe and get a new episode of the Final Word Podcast each week. It's the news we think you need to hear.
That's right. We think you need to hear it. Okay?
Yeah, it's what we say so.
That's right. And because all we do is give, every Thursday you can listen to our hysterical podcast, Idiot of the Week.
We round up the stupid because you know what? Somebody has to.
Okay. All we do is give.